Imagine sitting at your kitchen table, right? You are just entirely overwhelmed by grief.
Oh, it's devastating.
Yeah. The unthinkable has just happened. The floor has completely dropped out from under you, and your world has effectively stopped.
It just grinds to a halt.
Exactly. But instead of being allowed to just sit there and, process that massive loss, you're suddenly tasked with making dozens of high-stakes decisions, and you have to do it quickly and flawlessly.
Right, which is just an impossible ask.
It really is. You have to navigate logistics, legalities, these complex family dynamics, and ancient rituals. And you're doing all of this while feeling like you can barely draw a breath.
Right. Welcome to the brutal reality of funeral planning.
Yeah, exactly.
It is arguably one of the most intense psychological pressure cookers a human being can ever experience.
Yeah.
I mean, you are at your absolute lowest emotional baseline, right?
Totally.
Yet you are suddenly expected to perform at your absolute highest level of executive function. It is a staggering burden for anyone.
It really is a staggering burden. And that is exactly why, for today's deep dive, we are unpacking a roadmap that is basically designed to get you through that exact nightmare.
And it's an old roadmap, too.
Yes, a 2,000-year-old theological framework, actually. But it's documented in this modern resource from 2026 called the Catholic Funeral Planning Guide. It was published by Montano Media and Vigils.app.
Which is such a helpful resource.
It is, but our mission for this deep dive isn't just to, read you a sterile checklist of things to do when someone dies.
No, definitely not. We need to look way past the checklist. Our goal here is to uncover the profound theological and psychological safety net that the Catholic Church uses to essentially catch people when they are falling.
Right, we want to decode the why behind all these rituals.
Exactly. From the surprisingly strict rules on cremation and ashes to the massive tension over who actually gets to give a eulogy.
Oh man, the eulogy drama. But yeah, we are going to frame the Catholic funeral not as some, arbitrary set of rigid rules, but as a deeply intentional script. It's a roadmap through the darkest moments of human life.
It really is.
And I feel like to really understand it, we kind of have to start by looking at what modern society tells us we should do when someone dies, because it's very different.
That is the perfect starting point.
Yeah.
Because that cultural messaging, it heavily impacts the very first steps a grieving family takes.
How so?
Well, modern culture leans heavily into this idea of, quote-unquote, celebrating a life. I mean, you see it everywhere now.
Oh, yeah. Celebration of life parties are huge.
Right. Families want balloon releases. They want to play the deceased's favorite upbeat pop songs. They want to throw a party that essentially pushes the grief aside in favor of this, positive, life-affirming narrative.
And look, I get it. I really do. That instinct is completely understandable. Grief is agonizing, and celebration feels infinitely better. I mean, nobody wants to sit in the dark.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is how the Catholic tradition explicitly rejects that dichotomy.
Wait, it rejects it.
Yes. It does not force a family to choose between grieving a massive loss and hoping for a bright future. It insists on holding both of those conflicting emotions simultaneously.
Wow, that's heavy.
It is. The Church views death through the lens of the Paschal mystery. That is the core Christian belief that Christ died and Christ rose. So a Catholic funeral isn't just a look backward at a life that ended.
Okay.
It is an active, present-tense participation in that exact mystery of death and resurrection.
Which means it's a structured act of worship. It's not a freestyle memorial where you just, pass a microphone around a country club.
Right, exactly.
And because it's a formal liturgy, specific wheels have to be set in motion immediately. The funeral home takes the physical burden of the body, but the family is still left with an administrative nightmare. Which brings us to this surprisingly secular but vital piece of advice in the guide. The 2 calls.
Yes, the 2 calls. The guide is very practical here. The first call is to the parish because they control the church calendar, the liturgy, and, the availability of the priest.
Right.
The second call is to the funeral home. They handle the legal and logistical side, so transportation of the body, municipal permits, and death certificates. And these 2 entities have to align their schedules immediately.
Okay, let's unpack this because the logistics get messy so fast. The guide says you need to request 8 to 10 certified copies of the death certificate right out of the gate.
Which sounds like a lot, but you really do.
Yeah, you're going to need them for everything. Life insurance, banks, closing credit cards, real estate, Social Security.
It's endless.
It is. And to manage all of that, the guide strongly recommends designating a point person. But it specifically notes that this should not automatically be the spouse or the oldest child.
Precisely. You need the person who is most steady under pressure.
Yeah.
Their job is logistics, not grief.
Right. It's like designating a designated driver for logistics. You need someone sober to the administrative reality so everyone else has the emotional freedom to actually just fall apart and grieve.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Yeah.
Because if the widow is fielding calls from the funeral director about municipal burial permits, she isn't able to simply mourn.
Exactly.
The point person acts as a shield. And they're going to be incredibly busy too, because the church views the funeral not just as a single afternoon event, but as a multi-stage theological journey.
Right. The guide breaks this down into three distinct stations. Collectively, this is known as the order of Christian funerals.
Yeah, so station one is the vigil or the wake. This usually happens the night before, either at the funeral home or the parish.
Okay.
Station two is the funeral mass itself, which is the central act of worship. And then station three is the rite of committal. That's the brief 10 to 15-minute burial service at the actual grave or mausoleum.
And understanding that three-part structure brings us to what I imagine is the single biggest source of friction families face, the battle of the eulogy.
Oh, yes. It comes up all the time.
I hear about this constantly. People get incredibly frustrated. Why is the church so notoriously strict about stopping families from getting up and giving those long 20-minute multi-sibling tributes during the actual funeral mass? I mean, people want to talk about their brother or their mother.
It comes down to the fundamental difference between a homily and a eulogy. And it requires understanding what the Mass is actually designed to do.
Okay, lay it on me.
So a eulogy declares what the family remembers about a life. It is inherently biographical and backward-looking.
Right.
A homily, on the other hand, which is delivered by the priest, declares what the church believes about death and resurrection. It is theological and forward-looking.
Wait, so if you have 5 siblings get up and give long, emotional, unscripted eulogies, the Mass basically breaks down.
Exactly. Think of the strict structure of the Mass as a load-bearing wall for a family's grief.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
It is designed to hold up the crushing weight of death by focusing the entire community on God's promise of eternal life. If you knock out that liturgy and replace it with 45 minutes of personal anecdotes, the emotional roof caves in.
Wow.
Yeah, the communal prayer loses its center, and the Mass simply transforms into a secular memorial service.
But the guide offers a really smart compromise here. It says, if you want that long, unscripted storytelling, like the funny anecdotes and the favorite memories, put it at station 1. Do it at the vigil.
Exactly.
The vigil is flexible, it's highly personal, and it's exactly where those stories belong. If you absolutely must speak at the Mass, the guide advises doing it after communion, and it should just be one person delivering a strictly prepared 3-minute words of remembrance.
And this raises an important question for modern families,
Yeah.
Are we willing to trust the ancient structure? Because that strictness, that protection of the Mass from becoming a secular event, it doesn't just apply to the speeches.
No, it doesn't.
It dictates every physical object and sound in the building. It's a completely immersive experience.
Yeah, I noticed the guide is very specific about the visual theology here. Like, every object has a job. You have the massive Paschal candle burning next to the coffin, which represents Christ's light.
Right.
And the incense rising toward the ceiling isn't just for atmosphere. It is literal, visible prayer ascending to heaven.
It's beautiful.
It is. But I was really struck by the mention of the white cloth, the pall. What exactly is going on there?
The white pall is one of the most profound theological bookends in the Catholic tradition. When the coffin enters the back of the church, it is draped in this large white cloth and sprinkled with holy water.
Okay.
The symbolism is so direct. The exact same white garment and holy water that started this person's Christian journey at their baptism is right there to close it out at their death.
Oh, wow. So it's like a radical equalizer. It strips away whatever status, wealth, or titles they accumulated in life. Under that pall, a billionaire and a mechanic are exactly the same.
Precisely. And that egalitarian reverence extends to the music as well. The soundtrack of grief. The guide is incredibly clear that music at a Catholic funeral is an act of communal worship. It is not a personalized soundtrack to emotion.
Which means no pop ballads.
No pop ballads.
No matter how much your loved one loved a certain secular song, even if it has a beautiful message, it does not belong in the Mass. You have to ask yourself the difference between, what did they like to listen to in the car versus what does the church sing when it faces the abyss of death?
Exactly. It shifts the focus from individual preference to communal faith. The guide cites specific approved hymns that carry immense emotional weight but remain liturgically appropriate.
Like what?
A hymn like Be Not Afraid which offers direct pastoral comfort from God to a grieving family.
Hmm.
Or On Eagle's Wings, which is based on Psalm 91. It's very warm and soaring.
And then there's the Song of Farewell. The guide describes this happening during the final commendation at the very end of the Mass, while the priest is physically incensing the coffin. The entire congregation sings a farewell to the deceased while actively asking God to receive them. It's not just a song. It's the community actively doing spiritual work together.
And all of this, the incense, the holy water, the pall, the music, it all points to a profound, uncompromising reverence for the physical human body.
Right.
The Catholic Church teaches that the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. It isn't just a shell that the soul discards. It has inherent eternal dignity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because that reverence for the body during the Mass extends directly to what the Church allows you to do with the body after the Mass is over.
Yes, it does.
We live in an era where funeral homes are constantly pitching new, eco-friendly options, things like water cremation or human composting.
Right, alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction.
Exactly. So for anyone who hasn't heard of it, water cremation basically places the body in a pressurized chamber with a chemical bath that accelerates decomposition. It dissolves the tissues until only bone fragments remain.
Yeah.
And human composting turns the body into soil. Now, I'm stuck on this. Modern families are deeply eco-conscious, and the whole ashes to ashes, dust to dust narrative is practically foundational to Christianity. Returning to the earth via composting seems like it would fit that perfectly. Why does the Church actively block that?
It comes down to the mechanism versus the dignity of the human person. According to a 2016 Vatican instruction and a 2023 clarification from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Church rejects these methods entirely.
Entirely.
Yes. The Church draws a hard line between the natural decay of a body in the earth and the industrialized chemical processing of a human being.
Oh, I see.
Treating a human body like industrial waste to be dissolved and slushed into a sewer system, or commodifying a body into fertilizer to be spread over a garden, violates the inherent dignity owed to the human person.
Wow. Okay, so that's a hard no on the eco alternatives, but traditional fire cremation is still allowed.
It is allowed, yes, but the rules are incredibly rigid. The Church still strongly prefers full-body burial, modeling it after the burial of Christ in the tomb. But if a family chooses cremation, the ashes must be treated with the exact same respect as a full body. They must be kept intact and together.
Meaning you absolutely cannot divide them up into smaller urns or keepsake jewelry for each of the siblings.
Exactly. No dividing them,
Yeah.
no keeping the urn on the mantelpiece in your living room, and absolutely no scattering them at sea or off a mountain peak.
Wait, what is the mechanical theological reason behind that strictness? Why can't I keep my mother's ashes on my mantle? It seems so comforting to have them there.
It connects directly to the Catholic belief in the bodily resurrection. The remains must be placed in a sacred, dedicated place like a Catholic cemetery or a columbarium.
Okay.
Keeping an urn on a bookshelf isolates the deceased from the wider community, and scattering ashes to the wind treats the body as a mere symbol of nature. Burial in a sacred place ensures the person remains part of the community of the faithful who are visibly awaiting the resurrection together.
That makes a lot of sense.
Plus, it gives the living a specific, permanent place to mourn, to pray, and to remember.
You know, hearing all these strict rules, the rigid liturgy, the banning of secular music, the strict control over ashes, it might make the Church sound rigidly exclusionary. Like there's no room for human messiness or modern
You
tragedy.
can see how it sounds that way.
Right. But when you get to the appendix of this guide, where it talks about special circumstances and complicated deaths, you see a surprising pivot toward profound mercy.
It's a vital pivot, because the reality is grief is rarely simple, and death is often deeply tragic and messy.
Let's talk about suicide, because this is a massive one. There is an old, deeply painful assumption out there that suicide victims are denied Catholic funerals.
It's a terrible misconception.
Yeah. Families carry this fear in absolute silence, and they're terrified to even call the priest. But the guide outlines the current teaching, and it is radically different from what many people assume.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Church has fundamentally deepened its psychological understanding of human suffering. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, specifically sections 2280 to 2283, recognizes that severe psychological suffering, overwhelming despair, and mental illness severely diminish a person's moral culpability.
Meaning, if your brain is sick, you aren't freely choosing to sin.
Exactly. A mortal sin requires full knowledge and complete free will. A person dying by suicide in the grips of severe depression is likely not fully free or fully deliberate in that tragic act.
Right.
Because of that diminished culpability, the Church extends full Catholic funeral rites and profound mercy to those who die by suicide.
That is so comforting. And the guide notes that the exact same theological logic applies to overdose and addiction, too. The Church treats addiction as a brutal disease involving profound suffering and physical compulsion, not as a moral failure or a lack of willpower.
Exactly.
A person who dies of an overdose receives the exact same sacraments and funeral rites as any other Catholic.
And the guide offers a beautiful, practical piece of advice for the priest delivering the homily in these tragic situations. It asks the homilist to mercifully acknowledge the person's suffering.
Really, just out in the open.
Yes. Whether it was a grueling battle with mental illness or a lifelong struggle with addiction, naming that pain out loud is not a theological problem. It is an act of profound pastoral care.
Because sweeping it under the rug doesn't help anyone.
Exactly. Hiding the reality of their struggle under a rug doesn't help the family heal. Bringing it into the light of the Church's mercy does.
The Church's umbrella of mercy extends in some other really fascinating directions, too. The guide touches on unbaptized infants. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, there used to be this concept called limbo.
Oh, right.
It was this old theological hypothesis, never official dogma, but it was widely taught that there was a sort of neutral state in the afterlife for infants who died before baptism. It terrified generations of parents who suffered miscarriages or lost babies.
It caused immense pastoral pain. But a 2007 theological commission clarified this explicitly. The Church extended profound hope for salvation, trusting these infants to the mercy of God.
That's a huge shift.
It is. And today, the Church offers full, beautiful funeral rites for unbaptized infants, as well as specific resources and blessings for families facing the heartbreak of miscarriage or stillbirth.
The guide also addresses the quote-unquote fallen away Catholics, the people who drifted from the faith, maybe haven't been to Mass in 30 years, but never formally, officially renounced it. The Church essentially says, you're still ours.
Yeah, it assumes they are still part of the family.
Right. Unless there is a documented public renunciation, they are fully entitled to a Catholic funeral.
Which speaks to this incredible ongoing bond. A core tenet of this theology is that the Catholic funeral doesn't actually end when the dirt is placed on the grave.
Right. The guide details all these ongoing practices. There's the month's mind mass, which is a special mass offered exactly 1 month after the death. And there are novenas, which are 9 consecutive days of intentional, structured prayer for the deceased.
It's all rooted in the doctrine of the communion of saints. The Catholic belief is that death changes the physical nature of our bond with our loved ones, but it absolutely does not break it.
How so?
Think of it like an unbroken spiritual Wi-Fi network. When a Catholic receives the Eucharist at Mass, they believe they are literally in communion with everyone who has ever received it, including the person they just buried. They are still actively connected.
So what does this all mean for the family sitting at that kitchen table? Managing these ancient rules, the complex theology of ashes, the ongoing masses, especially in a modern mixed-faith family where maybe half the siblings aren't even Catholic anymore. It is incredibly complex.
It is.
And honestly, it explains why tools like Vigils.app, who actually published this guide, are stepping in to act as digital project managers for grief. They provide a platform to help families co-write obituaries, track these complex religious checklists, and manage the logistics together. So the family isn't crushed by the administrative weight.
Because the burden is unimaginably heavy. But the structure is there to bear the weight. The guide, the app, the liturgy, they are all tools designed to prevent a grieving mind from spiraling into chaos.
That's exactly it. To bring it all together, the Catholic funeral is not about masking pain with a party. It's a meticulously designed, ancient ritual that gives grieving families a reliable script when they have absolutely no words left.
Right.
It treats the human body with radical, uncompromising dignity, from the moment of death all the way to the final burial.
It provides a strong, unyielding vessel for the grief so the family doesn't drown in it.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive.
Okay.
We talked at the beginning about how modern secular society is rapidly stripping away these rigid, communal, ancient mourning rituals, and they're doing it in favor of highly individualized, unstructured celebration of life parties.
Right, we see it everywhere.
But if we continue down that path, what psychological tools are we actually losing? When we inevitably face profound, uncelebratory grief, the kind of grief that stops your breath and drops you to your knees, does absolute freedom and how we mourn actually leave us more isolated and unmoored than the strict, ancient scripts of our ancestors?
That is a fascinating question. If you're at that kitchen table, completely overwhelmed by the abyss, sometimes the greatest mercy the world can offer is simply being told exactly what to do next.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep staying curious, keep asking the hard questions, and keep seeking out the deeper context behind the world around you.